Centuries before airplanes or the internet, our planet was already woven together by an invisible web. This global network of ancient trade routes connected civilizations from the deserts of Africa to the ports of China, moving far more than just exotic goods. By the end of this journey, you will understand how these pathways fundamentally built our modern world, from the languages we speak to the food we eat. We will uncover why a single Roman coin found in India rewrites history, and how a whisper of an idea could travel thousands of miles to change a culture forever. What does our deeply connected past reveal about our own future? The desire for obsidian, a volcanic glass sharper than modern steel, drew our ancestors across vast and dangerous landscapes as early as 12,000 years ago. A hunter might carry a prized piece of this black glass for hundreds of miles, a journey far beyond their local hunting grounds. This was not simple barter between neighbors. It was the first spark of a system that would wrap the world in a web of exchange. What began with a single material soon expanded into a complex engine of civilization. Societies realized their surplus, whether it was grain from a fertile river valley or finely crafted pottery from an urban workshop, could be traded for what they desperately lacked. This was not merely about acquiring luxuries, it was about survival and prosperity on a scale never before possible. Archaeologists like Andrew Sherratt point to a pivotal shift called the secondary products revolution. People began to see animals not just as a source of meat, but as living resources that provided milk, wool, and the brute strength to pull plows and carts. This created new, tradable goods and made their transport far more efficient. But for trade to flourish over long distances, something more abstract was required: trust. This trust was codified through the development of standardized weights, ensuring a fair measure of grain or gold in every market. It led to the rise of a professional merchant class, individuals who specialized in the art of the deal. And it was etched into history on Mesopotamian clay tablets, which recorded binding contracts, tariffs, and trade agreements that reduced the temptation for conflict. This foundation of organization and mutual benefit allowed trade to burst beyond local horizons. So how did these early, regional networks transform into the legendary routes that connected entire continents? The answer begins with a single, shimmering thread: the story of the Silk Road. That shimmering thread of connection was never a single road at all. The Silk Road was a sprawling, shifting web of overland and maritime paths, a name we give to a complex reality that lasted for more than 1,500 years. While the Han Dynasty envoy Zhang Qian is often hailed for officially opening these routes in the 2nd century before the Common Era, he was really just formalizing pathways that people and goods had already been traveling for centuries. His mission was one of diplomacy and alliance, but its ultimate legacy was the creation of history's first superhighway for global exchange. The name is misleading, for silk was only the most famous of countless treasures moving in both directions. Caravans of two-humped Bactrian camels, perfectly adapted to the brutal desert climate, carried not just bolts of shimmering cloth but also pungent spices, brilliant ceramics, and gleaming precious metals. Yet the most transformative cargo was often intangible. Think of the Silk Road as the ancient internet, a network where data packets of religion, science, and art traveled alongside physical goods. Buddhism, for instance, migrated from India, transforming Chinese culture and philosophy as it moved. In return, technologies like papermaking journeyed westward, revolutionizing record-keeping and communication from the Middle East to Europe. This vast network was held together by its vital nodes, the oasis cities that rose like islands in a sea of sand. A place like Samarkand was not merely a stop for weary travelers. It was a bustling, cosmopolitan hub where languages mixed in the markets and ideas were traded as vigorously as any spice. Here, a merchant could rest, resupply, and negotiate deals under the watchful eyes of local rulers who grew wealthy from the constant flow of traffic. But the journey between these safe havens was fraught with peril. Bandits lurked in mountain passes, ready to pounce on laden caravans, while the deserts themselves presented a relentless enemy of scorching days, freezing nights, and shifting dunes that could swallow a man whole. Centuries later, the Venetian merchant Marco Polo would become the most famous traveler on these routes. His written accounts of the immense wealth and sophistication of the East seemed so fantastical to Europeans that many dismissed them as fiction. Yet his stories, whether fully accurate or not, ignited a hunger for direct access to these riches, a desire that would ultimately propel European ships across unknown oceans. The true legacy of the Silk Road, therefore, was not just the silk or the spices. It was the undeniable proof that our world was far more connected than anyone had dreamed. And while these land routes captured the imagination, an equally powerful network of exchange was unfolding across the vast, open waters of the Indian Ocean. While the Silk Road carved paths across continents, the world's oceans were equally alive with commerce. The Indian Ocean served as a liquid highway, its surface crisscrossed by ships powered not by engines, but by the predictable fury of the monsoon winds. For centuries, sailors harnessed these seasonal gales, riding the summer winds eastward and the winter winds back west in a grand annual dance of exchange. This maritime network is astonishingly ancient, with Egyptian hieroglyphs from over 4,000 years ago detailing magnificent expeditions to a fabled place known as the Land of Punt, from which they returned laden with fragrant incense and gleaming gold. The true engine of this ocean-spanning system, however, was the relentless demand for flavor. Spices like cinnamon, black pepper, and cloves became more valuable than gold in the markets of Europe and the Middle East, not merely for seasoning food but for preserving it and displaying immense social status. This craving set entire economies in motion. The Roman Empire's appetite for Indian pepper, for instance, was so insatiable that it created a massive trade deficit, draining the imperial treasury of silver and gold coins that continue to be unearthed in India today. Who were the masters of these early sea lanes? The Phoenicians emerged as legendary navigators, establishing a web of trade colonies across the entire Mediterranean. Their sturdy ships carried vibrant purple dye, glass, and cedar wood, connecting cultures from Lebanon to Spain. Simultaneously, on the other side of the world, the Austronesian peoples performed feats of navigation that seem almost superhuman. Setting out from Southeast Asia in massive outrigger canoes, they used their profound knowledge of the stars, the flight patterns of birds, and the subtle shapes of ocean swells to settle islands across the vast Pacific and Indian Oceans. As historian Philip Bojard argues, these routes did more than move cargo. They created one of the world's first interconnected economic systems. Ports like Zanzibar on the East African coast became melting pots where goods were exchanged alongside beliefs and customs. It was through these bustling harbors that Islamic culture spread, carried by merchants and woven into the local fabric of life. The exchange was also profoundly technological. The lateen sail, a triangular sail that allowed ships to sail efficiently against the wind, was perfected in the Indian Ocean and would later revolutionize European sailing. The risks of these voyages were immense, with ships and their precious cargoes constantly at the mercy of pirates and unpredictable storms. Yet the rewards of connecting east and west by sea forged a global partnership that complemented the land routes, creating a complete circle of exchange around the hemisphere. But what of the connections that flourished deep within the continental interior, far from the busy ports and caravan stops? Far from the ocean's breeze, another monumental trade network was silently crossing the world's largest desert. The Trans-Saharan routes were not for the faint of heart, a brutal expanse of sun and sand that connected the powerful empires of West Africa to the markets of North Africa and the Mediterranean, starting around the 8th century of the Common Era. The engine of this trade was a simple yet powerful exchange. The South craved salt, a vital substance for preserving food and sustaining life in the tropical heat, while the North hungered for West African gold, the metal that would soon underpin currencies across Europe and the Middle East. This entire system, however, depended on a single, magnificent innovation, the camel. Introduced in the early centuries of the Common Era, these ships of the desert could travel for weeks without water, their broad feet perfectly designed for the shifting sands and their ability to store fat in their humps making the impossible journey suddenly feasible. This was not a haphazard trek but a highly organized enterprise masterminded by Berber traders. These expert navigators used the stars to guide their massive caravans, sometimes comprising thousands of camels across featureless dunes. They established a chain of oasis rest stops, turning the Sahara from an impassable barrier into a calculated, if still deadly, business route. The risks were immense, from sudden sandstorms that could bury a caravan alive to the constant threat of dehydration, but the rewards were legendary. The wealth flowing along these paths built legendary cities like Timbuktu, which became far more than a trading post. As the Moroccan scholar Ibn Battuta documented during his travels, Timbuktu evolved into a dazzling center of commerce and Islamic scholarship, its libraries overflowing with tens of thousands of manuscripts on topics from astronomy to law, attracting the finest minds of the age. This cultural exchange was profound, as Islam spread peacefully southward through the networks established by merchants, blending with local traditions to shape new and powerful kingdoms. The sheer scale of West African wealth became the stuff of global legend during the pilgrimage of Mansa Musa, the Emperor of Mali, to Mecca in 1324. His caravan was so vast, carrying so much gold, that when he passed through Cairo, his lavish generosity with the precious metal actually caused its value to plummet, triggering a regional economic crisis that lasted for years. His journey put West Africa firmly on the world map, a testament to the economic power forged in the desert's crucible. So we see a world where deserts were not empty wastelands but vibrant arteries of commerce and culture. And while these old-world networks were flourishing, a parallel story of connection was unfolding entirely separately in the vast and isolated continents of the Americas. Across the Atlantic, a world apart, the civilizations of the Americas wove their own intricate webs of commerce without a single camel-wheeled cart or sailing ship. The Maya, the Aztec, and the Inca built empires connected by trade routes that scaled mountains, penetrated dense jungles, and hugged treacherous coastlines. Their economies thrived on unique treasures, none more vital than the cacao bean. This was not merely a food, but a form of money used in marketplaces and a sacred element in royal rituals. Gleaming green jade, carved into intricate masks and ornaments, symbolized life and power, while the iridescent feathers of the quetzal bird were so prized they adorned the ceremonial capes of kings. The Maya established a network stretching from modern Mexico to Honduras, with coastal ports like Cerros acting as bustling hubs where goods were loaded onto massive canoes for transport. How did they move such vast quantities without beasts of burden? The answer lies in human strength and ingenuity. Trained porters, known in the Aztec world as tlaimim, carried staggering loads on their backs using tumplines across their foreheads, traversing stepped paths that would be impossible for wheeled vehicles. Archaeologist Michael E. Smith notes that when Spanish conquistadors first entered the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan, they were utterly astounded by the city's main market. They described a place of tens of thousands of people with a staggering variety of goods, all organized and supervised with an efficiency that rivaled any in Europe. Specific high-value commodities fueled this system. Obsidian, the volcanic glass that started our story, was mined from a few key volcanic sources and then distributed across vast distances to be fashioned into razor-sharp blades and deadly weapons. But these routes carried more than just objects. The ideas of the ballgame, with its ritual significance and shared religious beliefs, traveled along these same paths, binding diverse cultures into a recognizably Mesoamerican world. How does a system built entirely on human power, operating in complete isolation from Asia and Europe, compare to the global networks of the Old World? It reveals a profound truth about human ingenuity, that the drive to connect, to trade, and to share culture is a universal force, capable of building complex networks in any environment. The true power of these networks, however, was often concentrated in specific, legendary places, cities that became the very hearts of ancient commerce. These cities were the beating hearts of the ancient world's circulatory system, places where wealth and wisdom converged. One of the most spectacular examples is Petra, a city literally carved from the rose-red cliffs of Jordan. Its power came not from military might alone, but from its absolute command over a critical trade bottleneck. Caravans laden with frankincense and myrrh from Arabia, silks from the East, and spices from India had no choice but to pass through its narrow, defensible canyon. The Nabateans who controlled Petra grew immensely wealthy by taxing this endless flow of goods, channeling that wealth into the breathtaking temples and tombs that still stand today. On the opposite end of the Silk Road, the Chinese capital of Chang'an served as the eastern anchor of the entire network. This was more than a city. It was a sprawling, cosmopolitan metropolis where Central Asian merchants, Buddhist monks from India, and Persian artisans mingled in its bustling Western markets. The sheer diversity of its population was a direct result of its role as the primary recipient of all the exotic goods and ideas traveling eastward. Then there was Alexandria in Egypt, a city purpose-built to be a hub of global exchange. Founded by Alexander the Great at the nexus of the Mediterranean and Nile trade routes, it became the ancient world's ultimate warehouse and intellectual clearinghouse. Its legendary library aimed to collect all the knowledge of the known world, while its massive lighthouse guided ships carrying Egyptian grain, papyrus, and every imaginable luxury into its twin harbors. What made these cities thrive was a powerful combination of geography, political stability, and dedicated infrastructure. They built secure warehouses, reliable banking systems, and safe roads, making them trustworthy places to do business. But their true legacy was the intangible exchange they hosted. In the Indian port of Calicut, the air was thick with the scent of pepper and cinnamon, a fragrance that drew merchants from Arabia, China, and later Europe. Here, haggling took place in a dozen languages, and marriages between local women and foreign traders created a unique, hybrid community. Later, during the Islamic Golden Age, Baghdad's markets were a symphony of commerce and scholarship. In its famous House of Wisdom, teams of scholars worked tirelessly, translating the philosophical and scientific texts of ancient Greece into Arabic, often via Syriac-speaking Christian scholars. This monumental effort didn't just preserve knowledge that Europe had lost, it expanded upon it, creating a new foundation for mathematics, medicine, and astronomy that would eventually fuel the European Renaissance. These hubs were the original engines of globalization, proving that when diverse people and their ideas are brought together, innovation flourishes. But this entire magnificent system, from the desert caravans to the bustling ports, was ultimately built on the back of specific, tangible treasures. What were the goods that were so desirable, so valuable, that they could motivate humans to cross continents and brave oceans? The true power of these networks pulsed through the veins of commerce, with a stunning diversity of goods flowing in all directions. While silk and spices capture our imagination, the everyday reality of trade was far broader and often more practical. Consider the towering cedars of Lebanon, a wood so strong and fragrant it was sought after by every major civilization for building temples and powerful navies. Or picture the deep blue lapis lazuli, mined from a single remote valley in Afghanistan, being carefully transported over 2,000 miles to become the sacred eyeshadow of Egyptian pharaohs. Even the golden amber of the Baltic coast, fossilized tree resin holding ancient insects, became a prized luxury in Mediterranean markets. These were not simple purchases, they were statements of power, faith, and identity. But the engine of trade was not solely powered by luxuries. Essential, practical goods formed the bedrock of these exchanges. Cotton from India clothed populations across the ancient world, while wool from Europe was woven into warm garments for colder climates. The entire Bronze Age, an era defined by its alloy, depended on a constant flow of tin from places like Cornwall in Britain to be mixed with copper from Cyprus. Without this long-distance trade, the tools, weapons, and art of entire civilizations would have been impossible. As economic historian Kevin Grainer points out, we must also acknowledge the tragic human cost woven into this system. The trade in slaves was a significant and brutal part of these networks, particularly within the Roman and Islamic worlds, where countless individuals were treated as commodities. Often, the desire for a single good could reshape an entire economy. The Roman elite's obsession with Chinese silk was so intense that it created a massive trade deficit, draining the empire of silver and gold, coins that archaeologists still find in Indian soil today. In a more positive light, the spread of citrus fruits from their origins in Southeast Asia to the gardens of the Mediterranean fundamentally altered diets and agriculture across the globe. These goods did more than just meet existing needs. They created entirely new ones, influencing everything from royal fashion to the flavor of a common meal and the strength of a soldier's sword. With such a vast and varied array of treasures constantly on the move, who were the people daring enough to carry them across the world? These sprawling networks were nothing without the human courage that animated them. Think of the merchant not as a distant historical figure, but as a person standing on a dusty wharf, smelling the salt and spices, hearing a dozen different languages, and making a calculation that could lead to fortune or ruin. They were the true adventurers, and their world was populated by a diverse caste. At the top were the wealthy financiers who rarely traveled, backing entire caravans or ships from the safety of a city. Then came the caravan masters and ship captains, leaders responsible for navigating both the physical and human landscapes of their journey. And at the foundation were the countless porters, guards, and camel drivers, whose sweat and resilience made every mile possible. Among the most legendary were the Sogdian traders from Central Asia, the undisputed masters of the Silk Road for centuries. Hailing from cities like Samarkand, they were renowned not just for their goods, but for their linguistic genius and vast kinship networks that stretched for thousands of miles. A Sogdian merchant could travel from China to Byzantium and find a cousin, a business partner, or a trusted agent at nearly every major stop. They were the ultimate cultural brokers, translating more than just languages. They translated customs, diplomatic messages, and artistic trends. In a similar vein, the Radhanites, a guild of Jewish merchants during the early Middle Ages, operated a breathtaking network that connected the Christian world of Europe with the Islamic caliphates and even reached into India and China. Their routes were trade secrets, and their ability to move across cultural and religious boundaries made them indispensable in an often divided world. Then there were the explorers who operated on a state-sponsored scale, like the Chinese Admiral Zheng He in the 15th century. His treasure fleets were unlike anything the world had ever seen, comprised of hundreds of ships carrying tens of thousands of men. These were not missions of conquest, but colossal demonstrations of power and diplomacy. They exchanged Chinese silks and porcelain for exotic treasures like giraffes from Africa, fostering tributary relationships and showcasing the immense reach of the Ming dynasty. The risks these individuals faced were constant and mortal. A merchant ship could be swallowed by a monsoon, his caravan ambushed by bandits in a mountain pass, or his health broken by a foreign disease in a land with no familiar medicine. An ancient text called the Perils of the Erythraean Sea gives us a glimpse into this reality, describing a Roman merchant who braved the treacherous monsoon winds and sailed to the Malabar coast of India, all for the promise of black pepper. He would have had to navigate not just the ocean, but complex negotiations in bustling, unfamiliar ports. The potential rewards, however, were equally staggering, with profits on a single successful voyage capable of setting up a family for generations. To manage such immense risk over vast distances, these traders developed sophisticated financial tools. In the Islamic world, the Hawala system emerged, a form of trust-based banking that allowed a merchant to deposit money in one city and have it paid out in another, thousands of miles away, using only a coded message and a network of trusted brokers. This innovation minimized the need to carry vulnerable chests of gold and silver across bandit-infested roads. The entire global network, therefore, relied on this fragile combination of human trust, specialized knowledge, and sheer bravery. But how did these caravans and ships manage to carry their precious cargoes across such impossible distances? The answer lies in the silent partners of ancient trade, the animals and technologies that bore the weight of the world. The sheer ambition of these trade networks demanded more than just human courage. It required a technological revolution. Without the right tools, crossing a desert or an ocean remained a death wish. The most iconic of these tools was the two-humped Bactrian camel, a creature so perfectly engineered for the Silk Road that it transformed the desert from a barrier into a highway. These animals could carry loads of nearly 500 pounds, survive for over a week without water, and their broad, padded feet were ideal for traversing endless dunes without sinking. They were, in every sense, living cargo ships for the sand. At sea, a different vessel mastered the waves, the D. Howe. With its distinctive triangular lateen sail, the D. Howe could do something remarkable: sail efficiently against the wind. This design allowed merchants to harness the powerful, predictable monsoon winds of the Indian Ocean, turning a seasonal weather pattern into a reliable shipping schedule that connected East Africa to India and beyond. But technology was not limited to what could carry a load. It also involved what could store value. The invention of standardized coinage was a quantum leap for commerce. Suddenly, a merchant from Greece did not have to barter his olive oil directly for Egyptian linen. He could sell his oil for silver coins accepted from Rome to the Indus Valley, a universal language of value that simplified transactions across countless cultures and languages. Infrastructure was the other critical innovation. Along the major land routes, a network of caravanserais emerged. These were not simple inns, but fortified complexes that offered travelers and their animals shelter, security, and a place to rest and resupply. Spaced a day's journey apart, they formed a chain of safe havens that dramatically reduced the risks and costs of long-distance travel. Historian Janet Abu-Lughod emphasizes that it was this very infrastructure, the predictable roads and secure rest stops, that encouraged the massive scale of trade we see in the historical record. The ancient world understood this principle of standardization well. In China, the Qin dynasty famously unified weights, measures, and even the axle lengths of carts, ensuring that goods and vehicles could move seamlessly across the entire empire. Meanwhile, the Romans built over 50,000 miles of stone-paved roads, allowing troops, messages, and trade goods to move at unprecedented speeds. A shipment of Spanish olive oil or British tin could reach the heart of Rome in a fraction of the time it would have taken on rough, unpaved tracks. These were the silent partners of globalization, the unheralded innovations in transport and finance that made the movement of culture possible. For every bolt of silk that traveled west, a new artistic motif or philosophical idea traveled with it, carried on the back of a camel or in the hold of a ship that human ingenuity had made possible. While merchants bargained for silks and spices, an even more valuable cargo was moving silently along these same routes, one that would permanently reshape civilizations. The most profound exchange was not of goods, but of ideas, beliefs, and entire worldviews. The movement of Buddhism from India into East Asia stands as a perfect example. This was not a sudden conquest, but a slow, centuries-long migration carried by monks and pilgrims who walked the same paths as merchant caravans. As Buddhist teachings entered new cultures like China and Korea, they did not simply replace local traditions. Instead, they adapted, blending with Taoist and Confucian philosophies to create entirely new schools of thought. This fusion is visible in the stunning Gandhara art from the crossroads of Central Asia, where statues of the Buddha suddenly appear with the realistic, graceful features of classical Greek sculpture, a lasting echo of Alexander the Great's earlier influence. This peaceful transfer of belief was replicated across other networks. Islam spread deep into Southeast Asia and down the East African coast, not primarily by the sword, but through the daily interactions of Muslim merchants in port cities. Their reputation for honesty in business and their compelling spiritual practices made the faith appealing, leading to its gradual and organic adoption by local rulers and communities. Scientific knowledge was another priceless commodity. The brilliant mathematical concepts developed in India, including the revolutionary idea of zero and the decimal system, were adopted and refined by Arab scholars before eventually traveling to Europe, where they would ignite new fields of study. Babylonian astronomical charts, Greek medical texts, all were translated, debated, and improved as they passed from one great center of learning to another. Even the most basic elements of daily life were transformed by this unseen trade. Think of the food on your plate, the journey of noodles from China, possibly inspiring the pasta of Italy, is just one thread in a vast culinary tapestry. Languages themselves evolved out of necessity. In bustling Mediterranean ports, a practical hybrid language known as Sabia developed, a mixture of Italian, Spanish, Greek, and Arabic that allowed sailors and traders from a dozen lands to communicate and conduct business. One of the most significant technological transfers in history began with a military conflict. After the Battle of Talas in 751 CE, Chinese papermakers taken prisoner by the Abbasid forces introduced their craft to the Islamic world. This was a turning point for human knowledge. Paper, far cheaper and more versatile than papyrus or parchment, fueled an explosion of record-keeping, literature, and science in Baghdad's House of Wisdom. From there, the technology would slowly travel through North Africa and into Europe, carrying with it the very medium that would one time enable the Renaissance and the scientific revolution. This constant cultural blending was a powerful source of enrichment, but it was not without its tensions. As new ideas flowed in, societies were forced to confront questions of identity and tradition. How much foreign influence was too much? Could a society adopt new gods, new technologies, and new customs without losing its own soul? The trade routes, for all the unity they fostered, also became conduits for misunderstanding and, at times, conflict. This paradox lies at the very heart of our connected world, a delicate balance between the incredible benefits of exchange and the inherent friction it creates. This delicate balance between cooperation and conflict defined the very nature of ancient trade. For every treaty ensuring safe passage, there was a rival power waiting to seize control of a lucrative route. The Silk Road became a stage for a centuries-long geopolitical struggle between Rome and the Parthian Empire. Both superpowers understood that whoever dominated the arteries of commerce controlled the flow of wealth itself. Their clashes were not just territorial, they were economic wars fought to impose crippling tariffs and divert the silk and spice trade through their own territories. Yet this same interdependence could also force a tense peace, as historian John R. McNeill observes, because the immense profits of trade made all-out war between major powers an incredibly costly and self-destructive endeavor. This push and pull created a world where diplomacy was as valuable as any army. Centuries earlier, the Phoenicians and Egyptians formalized their commercial relationship through binding treaties, guaranteeing that merchants could sail and trade without fear of seizure, a mutual agreement that benefited both kingdoms enormously. On the other side of the world, the Han dynasty took a more direct approach to securing its interests. They constructed a chain of fortified military outposts stretching deep into Central Asia, with garrison towns like the legendary Jade Gate serving as both a defensive bulwark against nomadic raiders and a customs house that regulated and protected the endless stream of caravans. This state-sponsored security was a clear declaration that trade was a matter of national priority. The line between merchant and marauder could be remarkably thin. The Viking networks across Europe are a perfect illustration of this duality. In one season, the same longboats that carried furs, amber, and walrus ivory from the Baltic to markets in Constantinople would, in another, transform into vessels of terrifying raids on undefended coastal monasteries. For the Vikings, trading and raiding were simply two different strategies for acquiring wealth, chosen based on opportunity and perceived risk. A more unified approach came with the rise of the Mongol Empire. By brutally subduing the warring tribes and kingdoms across the continent, the Mongols inadvertently created the Pax Mongolica, a period of enforced peace across the Silk Road. For the first time, a merchant could travel from the shores of the Black Sea to the capital of China under the protection of a single, overarching authority. This security supercharged cultural and commercial exchange, but it was a peace secured by the sword, demonstrating how absolute power could temporarily override the constant friction of competition. The relentless pursuit of trade advantages dictated the fortunes of empires, forging alliances and triggering downfalls. Yet this entire human drama, with its caravans and treaties and conflicts, was unfolding upon a living planet. Every bolt of silk, every ingot of silver came with a hidden price tag paid not in gold but in environmental cost. The price of global connection was etched into the very earth itself. For every caravan that crossed a desert, every ship that plied the oceans, the landscape paid a silent toll. the insatiable demand for goods drove a scale of resource extraction that forever altered ecosystems. To build the merchant fleets of the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean, vast forests of cedar and teak were felled, leading to widespread deforestation and the erosion of hillsides that would never recover. The Roman appetite for wild animals for its gladiatorial games decimated North African populations of lions and elephants. Even the relentless quest for metals left indelible scars, with silver mines in Spain like Rio Tinto leaching acids into the soil and waterways, creating a toxic legacy that persists in some forms to this day. Environmental historian J.R. McNeill underscores that these ancient networks established the very blueprint for global resource exploitation, a pattern of taking without thought for renewal that we still grapple with. Yet this environmental exchange was not solely destructive. The same routes that carried goods also became conduits for life, both intentional and accidental. The humble apple tree, originating in the forests of Kazakhstan, was carried along the Silk Road, its seeds planted in new soils from Europe to China, diversifying diets and agriculture. But less welcome travelers hitched a ride too. Black rats carrying fleas infected with the bubonic plague, stowed away in the holds of ships and the bales of cloth on camel caravans. This hidden microbial traffic culminated in the Black Death of the 14th century, a pandemic that swept across the trade routes and wiped out as much as half of Europe's population. How did ancient societies reconcile their thirst for wealth with the health of their environment? Some, like the Phoenicians, exhausted their local resources and moved on. Others, like the Romans, implemented early conservation laws, though they were often inadequate against the scale of their own empire's consumption. This ancient tension between economic gain and ecological cost is a lesson written in the soil, a stark reminder that our networks of exchange have always been intertwined with the well-being of our planet and our own bodies. The very pathways that spread civilization also became the highways for its most devastating plagues, forcing us to confront a profound duality. A ship docking at a Sicilian port in 1347 carried more than just spices and silks. It carried a silent, horrifying stowaway that would unravel European society. The very networks that brought prosperity now delivered a microscopic killer, the bacterium Yersinia pestis, which caused the Black Death. This was the dark side of connectivity, a pandemic superhighway that moved with terrifying speed along the routes merchants had spent centuries perfecting. Fleas living on black rats nestled in the grain sacks and cloth bales of caravan camels and trading ships carried the plague from its probable origins in Central Asia all the way to the heart of Europe. The result was almost unimaginable, a death toll estimated between 75 and 200 million people, wiping out as much as half of Europe's population in just a few years. But this was not the first time trade had turned traitor. Centuries earlier, the Antonine Plague, likely smallpox or measles, coursed through the Roman Empire along its magnificent roads and shipping lanes. Returning legions brought it back from campaigns in the Near East, and it ripped through the population, killing millions, including Emperor Marcus Aurelius himself. The empire's military and administrative backbone was so severely weakened that many historians see it as the beginning of Rome's long decline. This pattern repeated with tragic finality in the Americas. When European explorers arrived, they brought with them invisible weapons far deadlier than any sword, diseases like smallpox and measles to which native populations had no immunity. The result was a demographic catastrophe, with some estimates suggesting up to 90% of the indigenous population perished, a collapse that fundamentally altered the course of history. As historian William H. McNeill argued this was the grim cost of what he called the unification of the ecumene, the creation of a single disease pool where once isolated populations were suddenly exposed to every new pathogen. In a desperate attempt to control the unseen threat, societies developed new defenses. The concept of quarantine was born in 14th century Mediterranean ports like Ragusa, modern-day Dubrovnik. Incoming ships and their crews were forced to wait at anchor for 40 days, a period called quarantina, before being allowed to disembark, a simple but powerful attempt to break the chain of transmission. Yet, even as these routes spread death, they also carried the potential for healing. The same ships that brought plague could also bring remedies, herbal medicines from India, knowledge of anatomy from the Islamic world, and treatments developed in Chinese compendia all traveled along the trade networks, slowly building a shared body of medical knowledge. One of the most dramatic examples of this duality occurred in the 6th century. The Justinian plague erupted from Egypt, a hub of the grain trade, and swiftly infected the entire Byzantine Empire. It is said that at its peak, 10,000 people were dying every day in Constantinople, overwhelming the city and crippling the Emperor Justinian's ambitions to restore the Roman Empire. The trade routes that supplied the capital with its wealth now ensured its devastating exposure, demonstrating with brutal clarity that our deepest connections could also be our greatest vulnerability. A physician in Baghdad might have prescribed a remedy using ginger from Southeast Asia, a plant described in a Greek text prepared according to a method perfected in India. This was the daily reality of medical exchange, a quiet revolution in healing that traveled the same roads as spices and silks. While plagues showed the deadly side of connectivity, these routes also carried the very knowledge to fight disease. The foundational medical system of India, Ayurveda, with its holistic focus on balance, profoundly influenced both Greek and later Islamic medicine. Concepts of diagnosis, herbal treatments, and even early surgical procedures described in texts like the Sushruta Samhita found their way westward. This ancient Indian text detailed astonishingly sophisticated operations, from cataract removal to plastic surgery, and its principles were debated and absorbed by scholars across Eurasia. At the same time, the precise art of Chinese acupuncture was migrating along trade routes into Korea and Japan, offering a completely different but equally profound approach to health by regulating the body's energy flow. The spices that made food taste better were also understood as powerful medicines. Turmeric was used from India to the Middle East for its anti-inflammatory properties, while ginger was valued for aiding digestion. These were not just local folk remedies, they were internationally traded pharmaceuticals, their uses and preparations shared in bustling marketplaces and royal courts. As historian Vivian Nutten explains, it was this constant cross-pollination of techniques and substances that allowed medical science to advance far beyond what any single culture could have achieved alone. One of the most critical transfers occurred in the city of Baghdad during the Islamic Golden Age. Here, in institutions like the House of Wisdom, teams of scholars undertook a monumental project, translating the entire corpus of Greek medical knowledge, including the works of Galen, into Arabic. They did not merely copy these texts, they scrutinized, challenged, and expanded upon them, integrating ideas from India and Persia to create a new, more comprehensive body of medical science. This preserved Greek learning that had been lost to Europe after the fall of Rome, and it would later be translated from Arabic into Latin, fueling the medical renaissance of medieval Europe. Perhaps one of the most dramatic examples of this global exchange was the journey of quinine. Derived from the bark of the cinchona tree native to South America, its power to treat malaria was learned from indigenous peoples. Once discovered by Europeans, it became a desperately sought-after commodity, a key that unlocked the tropics for colonial powers by protecting them from the region's deadliest disease. The cumulative effect of these exchanges was nothing less than the foundation of modern medicine, built piece by piece across continents. Just as words for new spices and goods entered every language, this shared vocabulary of healing transformed how all of humanity cared for itself. The words exchanged in a bustling port market were as valuable as the spices being weighed. Across the ancient world, trade did more than move goods. It fundamentally reshaped the very languages people spoke, creating a linguistic tapestry woven from countless threads of interaction. When merchants from different lands met, they faced an immediate challenge: how to communicate for trade. The solution was the birth of pidgin languages, simplified hybrids that mixed vocabulary and grammar from two or more tongues to facilitate basic transactions. These were no one's native language, but they were essential tools of commerce. In the spice markets of Southeast Asia, for instance, a simplified form of Malay became the region's lingua franca, a common tongue that allowed Chinese, Indian, and Arab traders to negotiate prices and arrange shipments. This mirrored the role Aramaic had played centuries earlier across the Near East, the administrative language of empires that was also the daily speech of commerce from Egypt to Persia. The success of these exchanges often hinged on a crucial figure, the bilingual interpreter. These linguistic bridge builders were highly valued, acting as more than just translators. They were cultural brokers who ensured that a deal struck in one language was understood and honored in another. Their work reduced friction and built the trust necessary for long-term partnerships, but the influence of trade went far deeper than temporary market speech. Consider the journey of a single word. Our English word sugar began its life as shakara in ancient Sanskrit. It was adopted into Arabic as sukkar, moved into medieval Latin as succarum, and finally entered English through Norman French. Each step of that journey traces a well-worn trade route. The same is true for the word tea. Dutch traders who sourced their leaves from the port of Xiamen in southern China adopted the local Min Chinese word tea. This is why much of Europe says some variation of tea, but Russian and Persian traders who acquired their tea overland from northern China adopted the Mandarin word cha, which is why those regions use words like che. This process of loanwords, of absorbing foreign terms for foreign goods, enriched every language it touched, leaving a permanent record of cultural contact. The most profound linguistic legacy of trade, however, may be the very letters you are reading now. The Phoenicians, master merchants of the Mediterranean, developed a revolutionary consonantal alphabet that was simple and efficient compared to the complex scripts of Egypt or Mesopotamia. This was a businessman's tool, perfect for keeping quick records. As they traded across the sea, they brought their writing system with them. The Greeks adopted it, crucially adding symbols for vowel sounds, and from the Greek alphabet evolved the Latin script that now dominates the Western world. Every invoice, every contract scrawled in a new alphabet helped spread the technology of writing itself. This blending of languages was not just a convenience, it was a testament to the deep, organic connections forged by countless acts of exchange. And just as words and scripts flowed along these routes, so too did entire systems of economic thought and practice, the invisible architectures that made such vast wealth possible. A merchant in ancient Lydia no longer had to haggle over the weight and purity of a lump of silver. Around 600 years before the Common Era, a revolutionary idea was struck in metal, the first standardized coin. This was not merely money, it was a compact of trust, a guaranteed weight and value that could be accepted from one market to the next without question. The Lydian innovation, often a mix of gold and silver called electrum, transformed commerce by making transactions faster, simpler, and far more reliable. It was a language of value that everyone could understand. Yet coins were not the only answer to the puzzle of value. Across the world, societies used what was locally abundant and universally desired. In Africa and Asia, the smooth, white cowrie shell became a form of currency, its scarcity in landlocked regions giving it immense worth. In the markets of Mesoamerica, the cacao bean was both a delightful drink and a valid form of payment for goods and services. These systems of commodity money were perfectly adapted to their environments. The concept of credit is just as ancient. Long before modern banks, the temples of Mesopotamia served as the first financial institutions. They lent grain and silver to farmers and merchants, charging interest and keeping meticulous records on clay tablets. This system of credit allowed for investment and risk-taking, fueling economic growth that reached across the known world. As economic historian Peter Temin has described, the Roman Empire took the Lydian idea and scaled it to a breathtaking degree. By minting a common currency of gold, silver, and bronze coins accepted from Britain to Egypt, Rome created the first truly integrated common market. A merchant could travel the empire's vast road network and use the same denarius to pay for supplies, tolls, and lodging, a seamless financial network that powered Roman prosperity for centuries. An even more profound leap occurred in Song Dynasty China, where the sheer volume of metal coinage became too cumbersome. The solution was paper money, a lightweight note that represented a claim on a government store of value. This innovation reduced the physical burden and danger of transporting wealth, but it also introduced a new vulnerability. Governments could now print more money than they had reserves to back, leading to one of the earliest documented episodes of severe inflation. This is the eternal duality of financial innovation. The same systems that enabled vast trade networks and incredible wealth creation also brought new problems, debt crises that could ruin families and inflationary spirals that could destabilize entire empires. The very tools that built global connection also carried the seeds of economic collapse, forcing societies to constantly adapt and evolve. The fall of Rome did not end global trade, it simply forced it to evolve. When the legions could no longer guard the Mediterranean highways, the flow of goods did not cease. It simply found new channels, redirecting energy into the thriving maritime networks of the Indian Ocean. This pattern of collapse and rebirth defined the history of these routes. Centuries later, the Mongol invasions brought a wave of destruction, but from that chaos emerged the Pax Mongolica, a century of enforced peace that unified Eurasia and sent Silk Road traffic soaring to unprecedented heights. This unification, however, was short-lived, as a new technology was about to shift the center of global commerce from the backs of camels to the hulls of ships. The magnetic compass, invented in China during the Han Dynasty and perfected for navigation centuries later, was a quiet revolution. It allowed sailors to venture confidently beyond the sight of land, navigating by the Earth's own magnetic field through overcast skies and open ocean, making sea travel not just possible, but predictable and far more profitable. Political changes were just as transformative. The rapid rise of Islam in the 7th and 8th centuries created a vast, unified economic zone stretching from the Iberian Peninsula all the way to the Indus Valley. Within this Islamic common market, a merchant could operate under a shared legal framework, using a common language of commerce, Arabic, and a single currency, the gold dinar, which facilitated trade on a scale not seen since Rome. Even the climate played its part. The Little Ice Age, a period of global cooling that began in the 14th century, made many northern land routes more treacherous. Harsher winters and shifting glaciers disrupted mountain passes, pushing merchants and their goods toward the more reliable sea lanes. The story of Marco Polo encapsulates this entire era of transformation. His account of traveling the Mongol-controlled Silk Road to the court of Kublai Khan was not just a tale of wonder, it was a detailed commercial report. He described the wealth of the East not as a myth, but as a market lighting a fire of ambition in Europe. That ambition, fueled by the desire to bypass the middlemen who controlled the land routes, would eventually drive explorers like Vasco da Gama and Christopher Columbus to seek direct sea passages to Asia, launching the age of exploration. The old Silk Road slowly faded into legend, but the connections it forged were never truly broken, they simply adapted. The very ground beneath our feet holds the proof of this relentless adaptation, waiting for a trowel to uncover it. A single Roman coin found deep in the soil of southern India speaks more eloquently than any history book. This small piece of silver, stamped with the profile of a forgotten emperor, is a frozen moment of connection, a direct line to a merchant who completed a journey of thousands of miles. Modern archaeology has become our time machine, turning whispers of ancient trade into undeniable fact through the physical objects left behind. Excavations at the Red Sea port of Berenice in Egypt have unearthed a treasure trove of global exchange, with storerooms still holding black pepper that came all the way from India's Malabar coast and massive timbers of Indian teak wood used to build the docks themselves. Each peppercorn is a tiny testament to a voyage across the entire Indian Ocean. The silent testimony of shipwrecks adds another layer to this story. The Uluburun shipwreck, discovered off the coast of Turkey, is a stunning time capsule from the late Bronze Age. Its hull contained a breathtaking assortment of cargo: 10 tons of copper ingots from Cyprus, a ton of raw tin whose origins might stretch to Afghanistan, vibrant cobalt blue glass from Mesopotamia, and even amber from the distant Baltic Sea. This single vessel was a floating microcosm of the entire known world's economy. In the Americas, the evidence is etched into the landscape itself. The Inca Trail is more than a path. It is a monumental highway system engineered across impossible mountain terrain, with way stations storing goods like maize, dried potatoes, and coca leaves, all managed with knotted string accounting records called kippers. Scientific techniques now allow us to read these artifacts in ways once unimaginable. Archaeologist Cyprian Broodbank highlights how isotopic analysis acts as a chemical passport for ancient objects. By studying the unique chemical signature of a metal, we can trace a silver ingot back to a specific mine in Greece or a copper axe to its origin in the Alps. This method has proven beyond doubt that raw materials were moving across staggering distances long before the rise of classical empires. The discovery of Chinese porcelain shards in the ruins of Swahili cities on the East African coast or Roman pottery in Vietnam paints a picture of a world far more interlinked than we ever realized. What forgotten routes and connections still lie buried, waiting for a trowel to uncover them? Each new discovery does more than just confirm what we already suspected. It offers completely new insights into the scale and sophistication of these networks. This tangible evidence bridges the gap between our world and theirs, making the merchants of the past feel startlingly present. Yet, for all these material proofs of exchange, the most profound legacies are not the objects themselves, but the invisible threads they represent. The true impact of this ancient globalization echoes in our languages, our meals, and the very ideas that shape our modern world. That Roman coin in India is not just an artifact, it is a direct ancestor of the global economy we live in today. The foundational concepts of our interconnected world were not invented in boardrooms, but forged in the desert caravans and bustling ports of antiquity. The free trade zones that define modern commerce are a direct echo of the tariff agreements negotiated at ancient caravanserais, where merchants from different empires could trade under a shared set of rules. Our sprawling global supply chains, with components sourced from a dozen countries to assemble a single device, mirror the distributed production of the ancient world, where silk came from China, glass from Rome, and cotton from India to create a single, valuable product. Historian Nayan Chanda powerfully argues that globalization is not a new phenomenon, but has deep roots in these early networks. He suggests that the basic human urges to trade, to explore, to convert, and to control are the same engines that drive our modern global village. This ancient legacy is physically manifesting once again in ambitious infrastructure projects. China's Belt and Road Initiative, a vast network of ports, railways, and highways stretching across continents, is explicitly framed as a revival of the Silk Road, aiming to recreate those same flows of goods and capital on a 21st century scale. The very language of modern finance carries the imprint of these old routes. The word check, as in a bank check, derives from the Arabic word sak, meaning a written vow or promissory note. This was the instrument used by medieval Islamic merchants to move vast sums across the world without carrying heavy chests of gold, a system that evolved into the letters of credit that underpin international business today. The cultural blending that began thousands of years ago is now the fabric of our daily lives. The tomatoes in an Italian pasta sauce native to the Americas, the Buddhist temples in San Francisco, the Islamic architecture influencing buildings from Spain to Malaysia, all are living proof of this enduring exchange. This profound legacy does more than just inform our present, it offers crucial lessons. It teaches us that connectivity brings both incredible innovation and profound vulnerability, that economic interdependence can be a force for peace as well as a source of conflict. The ancient world mastered the art of connection without the technology we possess. What can their wisdom, forged over millennia of exchange, teach us about building a more resilient and equitable global future? The wisdom of these ancient merchants speaks directly to our modern challenges. Their networks reveal a masterclass in resilience, built not on brute force, but on an intuitive understanding of natural systems and human relationships. They did not fight the environment, they partnered with it. Harnessing the predictable monsoon winds for their ocean voyages was an early form of sustainable energy, a lesson in aligning our economic ambitions with the rhythms of the planet rather than consuming finite resources. This ancient ingenuity can directly inform our own search for renewable energy, reminding us that the most powerful solutions are often those that work in concert with the world around us. At the heart of this system was a currency more valuable than gold: trust. The merchant guilds and kinship networks that spanned continents functioned because of a shared code of ethics. A handshake or a mark on a clay tablet had to be honored across thousands of miles and years. This underscores a profound truth for our own global business landscape, that long-term prosperity is impossible without a foundation of integrity and mutual benefit. Yet these networks also carry stark warnings. The scars of deforestation from shipbuilding and the toxic legacy of ancient mines are a prelude to our own environmental crises. The Black Death is the ultimate testament to the double-edged nature of connectivity, proving that a network can carry a plague as efficiently as it carries prosperity. As economist Jeffrey D. Sachs has argued, history shows that open exchange can be a powerful engine for lifting societies from poverty. But this study of the past forces us to ask, at what cost? We must look at the slow withering of the Silk Road, which did not end from a single catastrophe, but from a creeping political fragmentation that made the routes too dangerous and expensive to travel. Its decline is a clear lesson for our own time, that global trade is a fragile flower that cannot bloom without the stable soil of international cooperation and peace. So how do we, today, harvest the incredible benefits of a connected world while protecting the unique cultures and environments that give it meaning? The answer may lie in the very ruins we are still uncovering, hinting at connections and stories that have been lost to time. The precise route of a Phoenician ship or the true purpose of the Nazca lines are secrets the past still holds tightly. For all we have uncovered about ancient trade, profound mysteries remain, reminding us that history is a living puzzle. Take the daring Phoenicians, master navigators of the Mediterranean. Some researchers point to controversial evidence, like an inscription in Brazil or similarities in DNA, to argue these intrepid sailors may have reached the Americas thousands of years before Columbus. While mainstream archaeology remains skeptical, the question lingers, a tantalizing possibility of transoceanic contact that rewrites our timelines. Equally puzzling is the case of a simple spice. Roman texts praise a cinnamon called cassia, describing its origin in a distant, fog-shrouded land. Yet the exact location of this source has vanished from history, a reminder that entire trade branches could wither and be forgotten. On the arid plains of Peru, the Nazca lines present a different kind of enigma. Were these massive geoglyphs visible only from the sky, a celestial calendar for farmers, a pathway for ritual processions, or perhaps even a sophisticated signal to guide trade caravans across the desert? We simply do not know. Archaeologist David Hatcher Childress has spent decades exploring theories of lost cities that may have served as critical hubs, their very existence now faded into legend. This speculation extends to the practicalities of ancient engineering. How did cultures move the colossal bluestones of Stonehenge over 150 miles from Wales? The answer may lie not in magic, but in a sophisticated and now invisible trade network that specialized in transporting monumental stones for ritual purposes, a logistics operation we can barely comprehend. These unanswered questions are woven with mythology. For centuries, explorers have searched for the biblical land of Ophir, a place described as the source of King Solomon's immense gold. Its location, whether in Africa, India, or elsewhere, has eluded identification, a ghost on the map that speaks to the powerful role that legend played in motivating real journeys of discovery. Each of these mysteries confirms that our map of the ancient world is still incomplete, with blank spaces that challenge our assumptions and inspire new generations of explorers to look deeper. A merchant haggling in a Samarkand market might never have seen a rock, but he certainly feared it. The trade routes were arteries for goods, but they also pumped lifeblood into the world's imagination, carrying myths and legends that gave meaning to the terrifying distances and immense rewards. These stories were more than just entertainment. They were the cultural software that shaped identities and justified the entire enterprise of long-distance trade. Consider the legend of the Silk Princess. Chinese lore tells of a royal woman who, determined to break China's monopoly, smuggled silkworm eggs out of the kingdom by hiding them in her elaborate headdress. This tale of ingenuity and subterfuge explains how the secret of silk production spread beyond its borders, transforming a state secret into a global commodity and empowering new centers of production. Far to the south, the stone ruins of Great Zimbabwe are silent, but the oral histories of the Shona people are not. They speak of a powerful kingdom that grew wealthy from its vast gold trade, a place ruled by a divine king and connected to spiritual forces. These stories are not just about economics, they are about legitimacy, weaving the kingdom's commercial power into a sacred tapestry of origin and purpose. Across the world, the Norse sagas pulsed with a different kind of ambition. These epic poems described voyages to a place they called Vinland, a land of wild grapes and fertile soil far across the Atlantic. Driven by a mix of trade dreams and the need for new settlements, these stories blurred the line between fact and fiction for centuries, until archaeological discovery at Elance Aux Meadows in Canada proved their essential truth. Why did these tales so often feature monsters? The colossal rock of Arabian folklore, a bird so immense it could carry off an elephant, was a narrative embodiment of the very real, unseen dangers of a sea voyage. A sudden squall that could sink a ship became a mythical beast, giving a tangible, terrifying form to the existential risks every merchant faced. Even the grand myths of ancient Greece can be read as metaphors for trade expeditions. The quest of Jason and the Argonauts for the Golden Fleece echoes real journeys into the Black Sea region, an area rich in gold. The fleece itself may symbolize the practice of using sheepskins to collect gold dust from mountain streams, a technological process elevated into an epic tale of heroism. These narratives served as moral compasses and practical guides, justifying the high risks and immense profits of commerce. But the exchange of stories did not stop with spoken words. It naturally flowed into the artistic expressions they inspired, leaving a permanent record of this cultural dialogue etched in stone, woven into cloth, and painted on pottery. A statue of the Buddha in ancient Afghanistan could have the serene, meditative pose of an Eastern sage, yet his face bore the perfectly proportioned, graceful features of a Greek god. This is Gandhara art, a stunning visual dialogue born where the Silk Road allowed two worlds to meet. Here, the spiritual ideals of Buddhism fused with the classical realism of Greek sculpture, a legacy of Alexander the Great's earlier campaigns. The result was a new artistic language that made a foreign faith visually familiar and accessible to diverse populations, helping it spread across Central Asia. This cultural fusion was not confined to sculpture. It was etched into the very skyline of cities across the globe. As Islamic culture traveled with merchants, its distinctive architectural vocabulary followed. Intricate, non-representational patterns known as arabesques, which symbolized the infinite nature of creation, began to adorn buildings from Spain's Alhambra Palace to the mosques of India. These stone and tile masterpieces were not mere copies. They were creative adaptations, blending geometric precision with local materials and building traditions to create something entirely new. Even everyday objects became canvases for cross-cultural conversation. Chinese potters, masters of their craft for centuries, began producing exquisite blue and white porcelain specifically for the Middle Eastern market. They incorporated Islamic floral motifs and arabesque designs into their work, creating a hybrid aesthetic that was neither purely Chinese nor purely Persian, but a celebrated product of global trade. As art historian Sheila S. Blair explains, it was not just the finished products that traveled, but the very techniques for making them. The secret of cobalt blue pigment, for instance, journeyed from Persia to China, where it was applied to pristine white porcelain, creating a style that would later become famous worldwide. This diffusion of skill transformed local crafts into international art forms. The stupas, the Buddhist shrines that dotted the Silk Road, tell a similar story of localized genius. While their core religious function remained constant, their construction reflected the land they were built in. In one region, a stupa might be built from red sandstone, in another from sun-dried brick, each using local materials and incorporating regional decorative styles, making the universal faith feel distinctly local. This artistic exchange was also fueled by the trade in raw materials. The demand for ivory, sourced from both African elephants and Asian walruses, fueled intricate carving traditions from Benin in West Africa to the workshops of Constantinople. A single tusk could be transformed into a religious relic in one culture and a luxury diptych for a Roman senator in another, its value multiplied by the artistry it inspired across continents. This incredible legacy of shared creativity presents us with a pressing modern dilemma. These cultural fusions, born of ancient connection, now often lie fragmented across national borders. How do we preserve art that belongs not to one nation, but to the story of human interconnection itself? A statue carved for a foreign market, a ledger written in a lost language, a road worn smooth by countless feet. These are the fragile echoes of our shared past. The physical legacy of ancient trade is now a race against time. From the caravanserais of Iran to the incense route in Oman, these sites are recognized by UNESCO as World Heritage, yet they face relentless threats. Modern cities expand over ancient ports, climate change erodes stone warehouses, and looters steal priceless artifacts to feed the illegal antiquities trade. Preserving this heritage is not merely about saving old buildings, it is about safeguarding the very story of human connection. In Timbuktu, a city built on desert trade, this danger became terrifyingly real. When conflict engulfed the region, local custodians risked their lives to smuggle hundreds of thousands of ancient manuscripts out of the city, hiding them in trunks and burying them in desert caves. They were not saving mere books, they were protecting centuries of astronomical data, legal contracts, and poetic works that documented the intellectual wealth flowing through the Sahara. This heroic act shows the profound value communities place on the knowledge these routes carried. Modern preservation now blends this local dedication with global technology. Teams use high-definition 3D scanning to create perfect digital twins of crumbling monuments, allowing for precise restoration even if the original is damaged. This digital archive becomes a permanent, shareable record, ensuring that a temple facade or a painted vase can be studied by anyone, anywhere, long after time takes its toll. Museums play a crucial role in this mission, transforming scattered artifacts into a coherent narrative. A single exhibit can reunite a Chinese porcelain bowl, a Roman coin, and an African ivory tusk, telling the story of their interconnected journey for the first time in centuries. But preservation must also extend to intangible heritage, the living skills that made trade possible. The traditional navigation techniques of Polynesian voyagers who read the stars and ocean swells are now being revived and taught to new generations, ensuring this priceless knowledge does not vanish. The greatest challenge is often balancing access with protection. How do we welcome tourists to a 2,000-year-old site without their footsteps slowly destroying it? The answer may lie in the wisdom of the builders themselves. The Romans used volcanic ash to create a concrete so durable it has survived millennia in seawater. Perhaps we can learn from these ancient choices, using durable, sustainable materials in our own conservation, efforts that honor the original craftsmanship. How do we honor the deep, human need for connection that these routes represent, while ensuring their physical legacy endures for centuries to come? These ancient pathways were far more than simple lines on a map. They were the very lifeblood of human progress. For thousands of years, they pulsed with the movement of silk and gold, but more importantly, with the exchange of culture, faith, and innovation that built our modern world. They remind us that our shared history is one of incredible ingenuity, a story of overcoming vast deserts and stormy oceans to forge connections. This legacy of connectivity comes with profound responsibilities. It asks us to consider the environmental cost of our exchanges and to build our networks on a foundation of ethical practice, just as the most successful merchant guilds understood that trust was their most valuable currency. Let this exploration change how you see the world, not as a collection of separate nations, but as a single, interconnected tapestry, just as our ancestors experienced it. We would love to hear which ancient trade mystery captures your imagination the most. Was it the lost source of Roman cinnamon or the daring voyages of the Phoenicians? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey through time, subscribe for more adventures into the threads that bind us all. Until next time, keep exploring.